everyone. Hi. I want to thank Grace for being here. Honestly, I asked you to kind of help me with my first little baby steps. First reading of my first book. I think one of my sons is here. Penelope is over there. Some of my closest friends, my oldest friends. But it really is important for me to see you here tonight. Yesterday was like such a high. The book came out, and I went on the Today Show, and then I went on AOL Build, and I had like 4 minutes to get my point across, and I felt like I consistently drove home this message of love and family, and it felt great. And then I got on the subway and I started checking my feed, and I read the news about our actor who's black and gay, Jesse, from what's the television show? Empire, thank you. Who was just getting a sandwich one night, late night, and they attacked him and broke his ribs and put a noose around his neck and threw lye on him. And I thought, wow, we really need to be here. We really need to talk about this. From all angles, from the part about family, and then also from the part about misconceptions. And so the people that are here, like how many of us are we today, right? 40, 30, 20. But then we go back and we talk about it with our friends and our family members and folks that don't get it and but want to. Some people want to get it and they just need another conversation or another entry point. And so, Grace, you've always sort of stood up for diversity and for women in particular. And I think a lot of this is a women's conversation. Moms and women and sisters. And then a lot of this is a feminist conversation, and that's for everyone, right? Feminism is for everyone. So thank you, Grace.
My honor.
And I want to start, can I just jump in? I want to start with this very quick passage that is going to talk a little bit about how I have navigated through this process. And it's from the chapter called Shifting. What came next was change, the slow shifts, the profound moments, the lessons learned that come along with navigating so much unknown. There were no big announcements from us, no formal family meetings, no memorable shouting from the rooftop declarations. Instead, I wanted us to move like water, changing incrementally in the flow of our days. I wanted to teach our children about transgender the same way my parents taught Ramona and me about blackness, infusing it into our lived reality, moment to moment, interaction to interaction. When we were growing up, Mama and Daddy never made us chant or march or announce our allegiance to the race, as they often had during the segregation. For Ramona and for me, our blackness, that key component of our identity, became more defined over time, with each experience my parents created for us. Identifying with our blackness couldn't be pinpointed to a single moment. No one ever sat us down and said, "You are black." We simply were black. It wasn't just explained to us in a picture of the Great Migration hanging on a wall, although it did include that, nor was it singularly defined by my Uncle Gil Scott-Heron and his revolutionary lyrics. Our culture had infinite manifestations, and that's just how I wanted our family to feel about gender. I wanted it to be normal and pervasive and beautiful. For it to be that powerful, it needed to be inseparable from who we were, indivisible from ourselves, like coffee from its water.
For me, this book, Jodie, is so much about you sharing a fundamentally personal journey, your family's journey, your journey, and it is about sharing it with vulnerability, with rawness, with honesty, and that's not an easy thing because I think we all live in a world where social media gives anyone access to our stories, everyone access to an opinion, and that can be a deeply uncomfortable thing. So I want to start by talking about how you prepared yourself to write this book and to make all of these stories public, because there is so much vulnerability in what you're doing, and I think with that, you allow people to connect and relate to your story in a way that wouldn't happen otherwise. So how did you prepare yourself to open up and be this vulnerable?
So a lot of the writing from this book were pieces that I wrote in my phone. right, over the subway, on subway rides, on the A train, going to work. You know, when you're on those like long rides, you have like streams of thoughts and you just start jotting them down. So it was a lot of loose writing on subways, the A train. And the good thing about your phone is you can kind of look back at it, you know, when you have a free second and you think, oh, that's such an interesting place to have been a year ago. So I had a lot of kind of stream of conscious thoughts, and then I had a lot of journals over the years, and they were stacking up and stacking up and stacking up. I was selling a business. I was in the beauty industry. I sold the business, and I had some free time. And so I thought, I will write a book. But I thought it was going to be a book on beauty. And then that quickly was uninteresting. And then I thought it would be a book on the navigation of a parent of a trans kid. Like, where do we go? What schools do we go to? What hospitals? Which doctors are friendly? Are there organizations? So I started to make this like very hands-on book for parents, and which I thought was a great idea because it's something I would have used. But someone said to me, if you don't have cancer, you don't buy a book on cancer. If you don't have trans, you don't buy a book on trans. And that pissed me off, right? That, was that you, Pamela? No, I'm joking. Pamela's from Random House. She helped me with the book. So that idea that, the step 1, 2, and 3 is not that, it wasn't grabbing anyone. So I went back and I was determined to write this book. And I took a summer to think about the perspective, and I didn't want to tell. And so when I really thought about it, when I spent a few months thinking, I didn't want to tell Penelope's story. I didn't want to tell another person's story, and I definitely didn't want to tell a trans person's story, being a cisgender woman. And although I've asked Penelope over and over again if I can share certain pieces, what was compelling most was to tell my story. And someone asked me a really great question: who raised you? Who raised you to get to this point to say yes? And so that was my agent. Agents can be great. She redirected me, and I really thought really hard about who I am, because I think that's more than anything else, it's the transition of myself. So it wasn't hard to share myself. It would have been a lot harder to share, to write something very straightforward about Penelope. So I was really writing about myself, and then I thought, the one thing I'm going to do is I'm not going to think about my children when I'm writing. I didn't want to be a good mom writing a good book about good parenting, because we know that's not true. We know that doesn't always happen. It doesn't always unfold that way. So I really stepped aside from parenting when I was writing, because the book will take you from when I was young, as a teenager growing up, or as a young child growing up in New York, and then it'll take you to my wild days going out in New York City to clubs, and then to Spelman College, and then into one marriage, and then into a second marriage, and then into career after career after career. So you have there's a lot of territory I cover. And I tried not to be anyone's good anything while I was writing. So I got through by releasing all the folks that I'm obligated to. I got through sometimes with a bottle of wine, because I had to go back to stories that were really personal. And I think what was great about the release was when I wrote something that was, a lot of things I wrote and I pulled out. So the good thing was that I could write it and then decide later if I didn't want to share all of it. So you'll find in the book, you'll find characters that don't have finality to them. You'll be like, well, what happened there? Well, I didn't want to tell you. You'll have to imagine that, there's some question marks there. And so that gave me a little bit of the security to release some of what I wanted and not all. And if anyone finds the lost papers, it'll be scary.
I think it's so interesting that you said you started out wanting to write a book about beauty, and my first thought was, but didn't you? I think that there's so many moments in this book that just made me stop, reread them again, and think about how rarely I read someone being so honest about missteps in their lives, about things that are complicated, because I think we live in a world where complicated, nuanced discussions are very difficult to have, and you did them with such grace and with such compassion in this book, and that was so wonderful to read. And one of the things that is a central kind of core issue to your story is the discussion of gender. And we were talking beforehand about what I described as kind of the yes and nature of gender, meaning two complicated, conflicting things can often be true. And one of the things I love so much was you talked about being raised by strong, leading feminist women. And for you, that matriarchy and that line of strong women was something you so identified with as a source of your strength and as sort of a core womanly quality. But then as you evolved and grew and transitioned as a human being, you understood those qualities are not necessarily biodetermined, that any human can be strong and confident and good and a leader. How do you explain that to people who are still kind of struggling to understand that both can be true?
Through storytelling. I can't explain it other than sharing the stories that I try to unveil in the book. So one story, well, when I was pregnant with my first child, I was having a girl, and I thought, this is great, because we will be feminists, and we will outnumber the dad, and, you know, we will just spend the rest of our lives fixing the world. And Georgia's my first, she's a feminist, true and true feminist. And then second child came, and it was Cassius, and we named him after Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay. And that was a whole awakening for me with I thought the glaring differences between boys and girls. Georgia was smart and precocious and talkative and analytical, and Cassius was mathematical and liked to see how things crashed together, like the forces of nature, right? He would crash things all the time. And so I thought, yes, we are Venus and Mars, for sure. And then my third child is born, Penelope. And I thought, yes, another girl, we are winning. Because I honestly, I thought that boys needed to be wrangled before they took me down. I mean, I was really in that mindset that the male energy needed to be controlled, and that in order for women to come out into their full glory, men somehow needed to be organized. So Penelope comes, and there is the things that I thought Penelope would be like Georgia. It wasn't the case, and Penelope showed early signs that Penelope was going to do things as Penelope wanted. So if I picked up diapers with butterflies, Penelope would swat it out of my hand. If I picked up a pink toothbrush, Penelope would swat that out of my hand. First word Penelope said was no. Total protest. I tried to organize Penelope's clothing with pink hangers because Penelope kept going for Cassius's clothing. No, Mom, I want to wear that. And I thought, well, maybe she just doesn't understand. So I'll color coordinate. I'll put pink hangers up. Penelope would refuse the dresses, the vintage dresses that I still have, you know, the Mary Janes. And I mean, these are, you know, we've heard these stories before, but Penelope wanted what Penelope wanted. And I thought, and there was a point 2 years down the road after Penelope had asked for haircut like Papa's and jeans like brothers. Penelope said one day to me, well, I said, why are you so argumentative? Why are you so angry all the time? And Penelope said, because everyone thinks I'm a girl. Penelope's 3. Everyone thinks I'm a girl, and I'm not. And so I thought in that moment, that split second, I thought I was defending feminism. I thought, oh, I had dropped the ball on this person. I forgot to raise a feminist. I forgot to tell the stories of Nina Simone and Billie Jean King and Shirley Chisholm. And, you know, I thought I'd forgotten to develop, because my hands were so busy with other things, to develop a strong girl. So I spent a little bit of time feeling really guilty about forgetting to pass the torch. Come to find out, Penelope is boy. Come to find out, feminism still lives on. Come to find out, feminism is how I raise my boys and my girls. Feminism is not just for me in Georgia. It is the way that it is the directive. The equality of the sexes is the directive for all of my children. And so when I started to think about how silly it is to how silly my thought process was early on. I started to think, gosh, I'm such a silly woman, right? You're so silly. And so I started playing around with this idea of gender. So now I tell my kids, I'm king. I call myself, I like to play around with words, especially with them. So I told the kids, the boys, that I'm king. And they said, no, Mama, you're queen. Girls are queens. I said, no, I'm king. And they said, no, you're queen, Mama. And I said, well, you're going to have to wrap your head around this. But I am king. And not of you or of this or of that, but of me. King of me. King is leader. And so I think we just have to keep, I don't know how to let people know about gender other than telling the stories, other than getting to know people who defy gender stereotypes. So the more you expand your friend group, the more you let other people into your lives, the more you acknowledge the person in your family who's gender nonconforming, the easier it is to realize that some of this shit is like not real. We just piled it on. We've made these stories because it's nice to make stories to make the world feel more safe. But then when it doesn't work, you just have to toss them out the window.
There were so many incredible stories. We get introduced to so many strong women in this book that were a part of communities that not only dismantled expected narratives and cultural norms or traditions, but also rebuilt them in their own image and in a more accepting, more inclusive, and a broader image. There was Dr. Cole at Spelman, Elaine Brown, Bishop Sylvetta Hamilton Gonzalez, who is the head of your children's school. Yeah. And these examples of wisdom and kind of rule breaking in a way, I found so inspiring, and I think everyone reading will find so inspiring. What have those women meant to you, and how did they inspire you to build your own version of this more accepting, inclusive reality in your own home?
I write about this a lot, and I've spoken about it a lot. So the women, you never know who's in your family till you write a book. You never really sit on them until you have to come up with 495 pages, right? And as Dr. Maya Angelou said, we need to ponder. We need to sit and ponder on the people who came before us and really spend time and think about them. Because if we are rushing through at the speed of Instagram, we won't really look at who has come before us. And so I went back down south when I was in sort of a low point. I called my mom and I said, I have to come home. And I don't even live there, but I was like, I have to come home. And she said, come, just get a ticket and come. So I went down south to Atlanta where my mom lives. And I sat on her floor and started unpacking boxes and boxes of pictures. And she has, the walls are covered with photographs. And, most of the photographs from our relatives, if you look back at them, I don't know, in the South, a lot of my relatives at that turn of the century are well-dressed and sitting poised and hands in a position of comfort and also power. Very little money. We're not talking about rich in material rich folks, but we're talking rich in spirit and rich in faith and rich in culture. So I went back and I looked at all the family members. And sometimes I was making up stories, and sometimes I was asking my mother to fill in the stories for me. And I learned a lot. So my grandmother, Dr. Gloria Blackwell, was a civil rights activist. She was jailed dozens of times. She fought school boards. She fought hospitals and won. She married 5 times. One man she married twice. She was a professor at Emory and at Clark Atlanta University. She had her PhD and her master's, at a time when we were not even asked to be in school as Black people. So she did things differently. My Aunt Lerma married Gil Scott-Heron. Sorry, my Aunt Lerma had a baby with Gil Scott-Heron. Chose not to marry legally. They lived together, they loved together. She wanted to work freely without having to answer. She wanted to love freely without having legalities. She did her life differently. My mother opened a school in Harlem after studying French, after going to Harvard and the University of Strasbourg. She did things differently. So when I looked back at the women who did things differently, I thought it would be silly of me to think that I shouldn't pull from them. And actually, I didn't have much to pull from at the time for myself. So they were my system. And I keep asking people to go back into history, go back to think about who came before us. Right now, we're following some really ridiculous leaders and some really ridiculous ways of thinking. And then if we just look back in this room, I'm sure we have relatives and who are trailblazers, but it's really important to go back and think about the women and the men who've come before us, because a lot of these stories are unwritten, and so we have to do our duty and pull up our own history. And so that was a lot of what I was trying to do in this book. I was trying to really tell a history that's American history, but it is Black history, which oftentimes is only oral history. And so I wanted to write it. I wanted to write my grandmother's name and my great-grandmother's name, so that I remember, but also so that Penelope knows who he comes from. And when I started to think about Penelope and who he was, a lot of the people that kept coming to mind that he resembled were the women in my family. And so then again, I got into this genderless thing again. Penelope is of this lineage of activists and trailblazers, regardless of race. Regardless of gender. And it was awkward at first for me to think that, and now it feels like second nature.
There were two passages that you wanted to read that related to family and the way that you've kind of built your own internal rule structure. Could you share those?
Sure. I like this one. So this is from one of my favorite chapters. It's called This Body, This Boy, This Magic. Every household has a belief system. Every mama sets a tone with her kids, whether she wants to or not. Intentionally or otherwise, we teach our children values, a certain code of ethics that remains with them throughout their lives. We spend years trying to sort out what we believe in. Then we share those beliefs with our children, infusing them with our ideas of right and wrong. At the top of my list was knowing that everything good, everything real and true comes from deep inside, beneath the surface. The culture I was now interested in cultivating with my kids was one of depth and of purpose, of training the mind to listen to what it really has to say. If there's one thing I've learned over the years through relationships, career experiences, and the many years I've spent reconsidering myself, it's that we are who we know ourselves to be, not how others perceive us. We are strong, we are wise, we are capable, regardless of what people see or assume when they look at us. Not the most revelatory of messages, I know, but one that I've stumbled over and kept coming back to, a message that has kept me going time and time again. And so it became my mission to steadily undo all the stereotypes we've learned about the body, all the stories that tell us who we're supposed to be and what we're expected to do. We're not a shy family. I often cook in my underwear, as my mother did when I was growing up. And the kids regularly hang around the house in little more than their boxers all day, reading books, doing homework, cleaning up, doing chores. More and more, I encouraged the body to be exposed. I wanted to remove the mystery, put the body out into the open so we could see it for what it is, a house of endless possibilities, varied and unique, no two ever exactly the same. I wanted to dismantle any notion of an ideal body and to show my kids that what's most important is that it's theirs to admire and adorn and perhaps contemplate, but never ever to compare. Can I go on for a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay, I love this. Oh wait, were we gonna do the, this is the one about my mom, I wanted to do this.
Do it.
Yeah, okay. When my sister and I were little, my mother trained us to be strong in her own way. During car trips, she'd climb into our back seat, squeezing herself between us, and start telling us stories about Afro princesses named Jodie and Ramona, revered in all the lands for their beauty, their brilliance, and their bravery. These princesses could do anything. We'd often interject during Mama stories with burning questions like, so wait, Rapunzel has cornrows, Mama, just like ours? I loved those stories because they made me feel as if the entire world, from east to west, north to south, was familiar with me, as if I were not foreign or strange or an anomaly, as if I were the prototype. I've done the same thing with my kids, making up stories for Georgia when she was younger and doing it with Penelope, Cassius, and Othello now. In my stories for the boys, 3 brothers named Pinnell, Cash, and O lie very still in their beds at night, waiting for their unsuspecting parents to fall asleep. As soon as they do, the magical brothers climb out of their beds, unfolding gorgeous black wings from underneath their pajamas. Out the bedroom window they soar, swoosh, into the brisk night. On their special wings, Pinnell, Cash, and O take flight, soaring into the night air, skimming the stars with the tips of their fingers as they whiz past them, circling a big yellow moon before continuing into the dark. With great speed, they fly across the earth, touching down in Ghana, in Vietnam, wherever they please, visiting family and friends, tasting delicacies, simply for the adventure and the excitement of it all. After roaming the world all night, thoroughly spent from all the fun they've had, they soar back across the ocean against an approaching sun, climb through the window and into their warm beds, then tuck themselves under the covers just before Mama comes in to wake them with morning kisses. In my stories, the children are brave and undaunted, flying thousands of miles without trying, without tiring, getting by on the strength of their wits, the capability of their bodies, and of course, the bond they share with one another. They are their own idols. They are the masters of whatever universes they create. This is how I see all of my children, free and powerful.
There's so much talk of freedom and release and letting go in this book and struggling against it and finding spaces to embrace that freedom. But the thing that struck me most was a line where you said you learned that freedom for you is not the same as it is for everybody else. And that I had to read and reread over and over again, because that is a profound thing to really understand and own, especially as a parent. How have you learned to accept and let go and realize that your children, especially Penelope's definition of freedom, might be very different than your own?
You know, it was frustrating because I couldn't fix things with the basic information that I had. And I was always looking at my kids, and particularly Penelope, and trying to fix the scenario, trying to make him happy, trying to smooth out his worry, but I was doing it from my perspective. So my perspective is family, close family. I like being in the mountains. I like being outside. I like being without my clothes on. I like cooking in my underwear. I mean, these things for me are freedom, right? And happiness. And so the things that I was trying to share with my kids were the things that made me feel open and comfortable and confident. But some of those things they loved. I had this game where the beginning of the spring, we would all run out in front of our lawn, and it was this big lawn, and there was no one there. And so we'd strip off our clothes, and then we'd run from the porch to the end of the forest and scream, "Free like a bird." And I made them do it. I think they liked it for many years, because, you know, who doesn't want to run outside in the grass with no socks and no clothing on, just underwear? And I would insist that the whole family would run across the lawn naked. Joe, their father, eventually said, I'm not doing that. It's just too much stuff happened. I'm not doing that. And eventually, Othello and Cassius would do it. Penelope would pull back. And so I had to, and I had to think, well, why does this not work for him? Why is this not the best thing in the world? What does his happiness look like? And when you come up against when you fail as a parent, because basically we try our thing over and over again. When you fail as a parent, you have to find something else. And I was forced to ask myself, what does his happiness look like? And what does his freedom feel like? And the things that you might feel, and I might share some of those freedoms, but if one thing is off, if one thing is being held from me, then I'm choking. And so when you have a home and you have food and you have education and you have relatives, you have all of that, but you don't have the acceptance of your identity, which for other people might feel so small, that is, you're not free. And so I really had to place identity, something we take for granted, as a freedom. And when I could see that, an identity is a personal thing. So each person's freedom is different. Each person's way of expressing themselves in this life is a personal thing. And at a certain point, I was like, we all have, who am I to hold and to hold back on someone's freedom? And who am I to determine your happiness? So I just decided, let happiness be in all forms. Yeah. I couldn't continue to write Penelope's story. A lot of times as parents, we are writing our children's stories similar to ours, the colleges we went to and the jobs and the careers and the friends and the paths. But when it was so obvious that what many of the things that I wanted weren't for Penelope, it became glaringly obvious that no one's life is a replication of the parent's life. And so I just had to stop and say, freedom is for that individual person to choose.
So many of the narratives in the book about freedom are related to the body and this, what you call the battle of the body, and this struggle with what we wish our body looked like, what we think the world would like our body to look like, and how we take care of it. And so much of your story is about taking care of other people's bodies and about ensuring the safety of those bodies, the comfort of those bodies. I want to know, especially in the midst of a book coming out and a book tour, how are you taking care of your body? And
it
are
sounds
you
like a beauty
prioritizing?
conference. I didn't take care of my body for a long time. And I was really just going based on genetic ability, right? But for a long time, I was working on 3 hours sleep. I was not resting. My mind wasn't settling. And I was nursing and then birthing and then nursing and then launching a company and it broke down. And I had, multiple miscarriages, and I thought, wow, this is weird. My body has always performed for me. I never had to question whether my body was going to do what I needed it to do. And when it stopped, I had to really change my game up. Also, when I became 45, I had to change my game up. So just a short little quick thing. I run every week. I meditate every day. But those are the fundamentals. It's like, you get up, you breathe. For me, I get up, I meditate, or I get up, I run. But the deeper thoughts around that I spent a lot of time really thinking about the body while I was writing this and thinking about what its purpose is. Right? Why are we here? Is it for the body? Is it for the soul? And what is this body supposed to be doing for us anyway? I'm going to read, because I probably wrote it better than I can say it. The battle with the body is a long, ultimately solo journey, one that starts as soon as we're born. In the beginning, our bodies serve a clear purpose to breathe and eat, move and think, grow and refuel. The soul, I believe, is at peace with the body during this stage. But the trouble starts as we accumulate more filters, more ways of labeling ourselves, Black, female, older, ethnic, metropolitan. All those filters start elbowing their way in, vying for dominance, creating a division between our bodies and our authentic selves. The body then becomes vain, caring more about the size, the shape, the color of it than about what the soul has to say. This is when the soul and the body start their battle. From my experience, no one escapes the struggle. There are no free passes. So I was thinking that, it's hard to. I was thinking if Penelope feels out of sorts with his body, or if a trans person, taking it off Penelope specifically, but when people feel out of sorts with their body, is it because the body is asked to do something it's not? Is it because the expectations around the body are unrealistic? Is it because we're literally measuring our eyelashes and our hips and we're relating that to femininity? And we're measuring our thumbs, for lack of a better term for men, and measuring that to their masculinity. And so I started looking at my body too. I was asking Penelope to love his body. I had to start looking at my body as well. And it is almost an ongoing journey to figure out what you want about this body and what you don't. I'm not quite sure. I do know that when it fails, I want it back. I want the power back. I want the ability back, and I care less about the high-rise jean fit, you know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, it's nice when you wear them, but when you get a smack in the face about. So here's another short, quick story. When Penelope was born, it was an emergency birth because my placenta didn't have enough oxygen. So every contraction, he was suffocating. We had to emergency deliver, and it was touch and go. And when he came out, he looked like he had been in a fight, like he had won the fight. And his dad made this comment, which was, ooh, because Penelope came out like all face and like wide eyes, and Dad goes, ooh, Dad, I'll always love you. And so the room was a little quiet. I knew where he was coming from, but the doctors were thinking, geez, this guy is not very sensitive to the mama who just almost lost her baby and the baby who almost wasn't going to be here. But he said, Penelope is not such a pretty girl. And I thought in that moment, we are not born to be pretty. We are born to be alive. And I wasn't even talking about gender. I was just talking about the body and the human form and life. And so you go through these moments, you go through birth and you go through a challenge and you think, all I want is life. All I want is life. Biomimicry, following a lot of science is based on what biology and what nature does to promote life. So when you go through the airport and you do this thing, it's imitating echolocation. It's imitating how bats pick up on sound and make visuals based on sound. So if we follow nature, we will be much more advanced. If we follow nature and how nature promotes life, as humans, we will be much more advanced. I started to think it's just about life and how the body can be promoting life and how we as people should be promoting life. So a little bit of a side tangent, but that is where I stand on the body.
Your writing about the body connects so much to kind of this constant evolution of broadening your definitions, broadening your worlds, making more room for more conflicting identities that are all accurate and all true. And I really, really loved the way that you were talking about, I believe it was a story with Cash, when you were talking about wanting to accept all the different sides of your children. And Cash was very into science, but also very into teddy bears. And these two things that felt somewhat conflicting, but loving, nurturing all of those different sides of your children. And I'm wondering, in that process of nurturing your children and loving all of their sides, did that help you do the same for yourself?
No. I'm always conflicted. There's someone in the room who says I'm one of the most conflicted persons here on this earth. It does help to have 5 children, multiple genders, multiple backgrounds, multiple fathers, because you see that there is no blueprint, there is no ideal. They are so varied. I have one adopted kid. I have one kid whose father is from Vietnam and Switzerland. I have the other 3, their father's from Ghana. I have cisgender, transgender, genderqueer, undecided. And so when I look, there is no ideal, and I have to I've gotten a bit more used to over the last several years of this and that, And so with Cassius, he's my scientist. He's 13 years old, and he thinks from a mathematical science mind. So his take on gender is very scientific. He says, look, I love my brother. I'll use the right pronouns. I'll always respect him. However, if we're talking in science terms, transgender is not scientifically proven. It is not a fact. So, and he's 13. And so we have to speak anatomically, and we have to understand that this is a female body that we're talking about for Penelope. And we have this thing in our house where you can take the microphone and you can go as long as you want. So we all listen to that, we try. And then Penelope takes the proverbial microphone and says, well, it's not science. I'm not science. I'm just the way God made me. You're always so sciencey, Cassius. You got to get out of that. You got to have lived experience. And so he's talking about himself as he knows himself. And he says, I'm not science. I'm the way God made me. And then Cassius says, yeah, but God's not proven either. Like, I don't believe in God. So all of that to me is like not where I am. So there's a back and forth in our house. It's a back and forth conversation in our house. The science kid, who's very rigid, he also has a lot of teddy bears. He's the kid who has all the teddy bears, and he talks to his teddy bears, and they talk back to him. So I caught that, I peeped that, and I was like, Cassius, I need to speak to you for a second. So I see you having a conversation with your teddy bears. And he's like, Mom, I know where you're going. And I'm like, well, I just want to know, when you speak, do they speak back? And he says, yes, Mom, they do. And I said, that's interesting. So here's, he wants scientific proof on some things, and some things he knows cannot be proven, and they still exist, and they're still very real. And I have to let him ride that out. And I know that if Pinnell and he were probably voting age, they might vote differently right now. And if they had to state a position on gender, they probably would state it very differently right now, but they're living together. They'll be living together for 15, 16, 17, 20 years perhaps. And they will have shared bathrooms, and they will have shared the dining room table, and they will have shared the basketball court. So they will have lived experience together with vastly different beliefs, which is absolutely fine. And so what I thought about it is that we don't have to agree. We don't even have to agree with ourselves. We just have to live it. We have to keep living it. We have to keep experiencing the conflict, and then eat dinner together. So sit down and eat dinner with the very person you don't agree with, even if that person is yourself. Yeah.
How do you navigate that? That was part of a section of the book where you call the lab,
Yeah.
where you had these conversations with your children. You sit down, sometimes in a circle with your knees touching, and someone gets to talk without being interrupted. And you can talk about things with very different belief systems. How, as a parent, do you navigate that when those discussions get heated?
So this used to be subversive tactic, right? Like the kids they never knew it was well, now they do, right? Because Penelope's here and I've talked about it so much. But I used to just say, like, let's sit down, let's talk it out, and we can spend as much time as necessary on it. And it would be everyone had so much to say, and each person would be so verbose that by 30, 40 minutes, the kids would be like, okay, can we just go play basketball, right? They would be tired of the debate. But they had debated, and they had not thrown punches, right? So now it's a little bit more difficult because Kasia said to me, this is not a bunny farm, Mom. We're not just nice little bunnies. We want to fight. And if I throw a punch, it's what kids do. So, these are boys, and they don't always want to discuss, but we still have to. I don't know if it's, I think it's something I'm sticking with right now. I'm not changing that up. We talk things out. And I did find out, this is really interesting, that Cassius is a creative writer. And his last creative writing piece is a sci-fi love story. So I think the talking it out is a good thing for us.
He's working out that conflict between teddy bear and science.
Totally. Love and science.
I want to open it up to the crowd in a minute, but I want to end with one last question. You wrote, perhaps we are only as strong as the people who teach us. And I think there's so much truth in that statement. And after that, you said, I've seen it for myself. Children rise to the highest vibration around them. And I want to end tonight on that note. As a queer person, I want to thank you for constantly working tirelessly to evolve your understanding of gender and identity and moving forward with a mind that is about love and not about ego, and about expansion rather than fear and retreat. And decisions that you're making like this with parents and any caregiver making profoundly affect a child's life. And I think about myself and any other queer person or anyone in the LGBTQ community, if they had that type of openness, what that would mean as they grow up. So I want to, thank you for that. And I want to talk about the people that teach us. And you are now one of those people. You have been in this lineage of women, and not just women, but strong people who have taught you how to think outside of the box, how to dismantle perception and narratives, and you have now stepped into that role fully. So I would like to say, for anyone who's here, what advice do you have for people who would like to do the same, who would like to step into that position as an ally, as a teacher, or as a leader? What would you like to leave people with if they'd like to use your story as an example?
That's a big question. Well, there are multiple things. One, I think we need to first, and I say this all the time, expand our friend group, because we're not going to be of any use when our Facebook friends look just like us. So there was a moment when I looked on my Facebook and everyone was Black, female, educated, cisgender. And I thought, well, that's not helpful or accurate, and it's not going to get me anywhere with my kid who's trans. And so I made it my mission, and it was a really awkward decision, because I said to my kids, this year, we're going to make new friends, and they must all be transgender. And they said, that's really weird. And we're not doing that. And I said, no, you are doing it. And so we went to transgender sleepaway camp, family sleepaway camp. And we joined organizations. We joined the Ackerman Institute, Gender and Family Project. I work with HRC, Human Rights Campaign. I work with organizations that are run by LGBT folks, that support LGBT causes, that help us understand what it means to be different. And that brought me in a whole new set of friends. And so that's really important. We have to make our friendships wider. We have to expand from our core community and involve people that we don't understand. Because the very thing that a cisgender person doesn't understand about a trans person is the thing we don't understand about ourselves. So that's going to help us be allies, expanding our friendship. And then I think we have to really put our money, this is a really important thing, we have to change the way we spend our money. So the same thing we're asking companies to be more diverse, we're asking companies to hire differently and use their money differently. We have to do that in our own families. So I took money away from some things and I put it towards other things, and those other things were like transgender sleepaway camp, trans peer groups. I work with businesses that are LGBT friendly. So I think we have to, and that makes you conscious of it, because we are conscious of when we spend our money. Well, sometimes we're unconscious, but when you have to write a check to a place that you don't normally do, when you have to peel off a couple $1,000s, you're like, do I really want to do this? And it makes you stop and think, what does my life consist of? Does it consist of all heteronormative ideas and companies and people and theories, or is it expansive? Does it challenge me? Does it challenge my faith? Does it challenge my gender? Does it challenge my checkbook? You know what I'm saying? So I think we have to open up our friendship and then change where we spend our money. Those two things for me were pivotal in terms of being an ally, and then also pivotal in terms of realizing how biased my life was. We cannot be allies unless we look at the bias first that we hold. And so dropping that bias and peeling that bias off takes a lot of time, but it is the first step in allyship.
And before we open up to the audience questions, could you share one last passage with us from Bishop Salvetta?
Oh, yeah. How much time do we have?
Good time. Read it.
Okay. So my kids go to this school in Brooklyn. It's a private school called McAdemy, and it's in Crown Heights. Crown Heights is like mostly Caribbean, a lot of Hasidic Jews, families. I was nervous that this was not going to be the most accepting community for a trans family. And I was wrong. Okay. The captain of this academic ship is Bishop Sylvita Hamilton Gonzalez, the founder of our school, fondly known as Bishop. She is a tall woman in her 60s with long dreadlocks that are always beautifully coiled into a bun. Bishop usually strides into work each day wearing real ready-for-action clothing. Often that looks like a Bob Marley t-shirt, sandals with thick woolen socks, and a long, beautiful African print skirt. In fact, each staff member wears clothing that best expresses who they are. There's no uniformity about the way people are put together at McAdemy, but it's always meticulous and full of self-pride. Some have natural, some have weaves, some have long, decaled nails with ornate designs and rhinestones. It's refreshing. Under Bishop's leadership, that message is pervasive. It's reflected not only in the African artifacts that line the school's shelves and the many black faces that appear on the walls, but also in the presentation of its people. The adults that these kids see every day are a reflection of themselves, multiplied in a beautiful variety. As Joe and I walk through the tree-lined streets of Crown Heights to meet with Bishop about Penelope, we held hands in solidarity. As much as we loved McAdemy, respected the staff and kids and the administration, we were prepared to remove our children and our money from the school in the next few minutes, if the next few minutes didn't go as well as we'd hoped. We walked silently as I gathered my thoughts. Truthfully, I had never felt comfortable talking about trans in large black circles I'd been in all my life. If we were reading the subtext right, transgender was a topic frowned upon in our communities, discussed only in whispers and behind closed doors, frivolous at best, shameful at worst. It was not something we black folk talked openly about, rallied around, or championed. And it most certainly wasn't considered a black issue like poverty or gun control or racism. From what I'd experienced, much of black culture and West Indian culture and Latino cultures were steeped in traditions that see gender variance and homosexuality as sacrilegious and amoral. Bishop, I began mustering my strongest authoritative voice. I know this might go against what you believe, but Penelope has asked to be recognized as a boy. I figured I'd get straight to the point. We respect everything that you've done for our kids, but we need more. Going forward, we're asking everyone at the school to refer to Penelope as he. Bishop blinked back at us, shifting her weight in her chair. Then she unclasped her hands, placing her palms on the desk and leaning forward. I read your letter, she said softly, and I was very moved. Bishop smiled then, warmth radiating from her kind eyes. Penelope is a prophet, and I'm with him on this journey. After that, the knot in my stomach released, along with all the tension that filled the room. I thought Bishop might quote the Bible, as many had done. We thought she might say something like, I'm sorry, Miss Patterson, Mr. Garte. Although we'd like to help you, we are God-abiding community, and we cannot, in the name of God, support such views. But instead, Bishop sided with humanity. She placed herself next to the child and a family in need. And by doing just that, she aligned herself with the highest force of all, the God of love. I am with him, the words every parent hopes to hear. That afternoon, we understood definitively that Bishop would accept the whole person and would go with her students wherever they were journeying. If Penelope had asked us to call him love, we would have called him that, Bishop said moments later to a news crew working on a story about transgender. The fact that Bishop had chosen the word love in relationship to transgender and to Penelope told me how purely she saw people. Thank you.
Beautiful. I'd like to open it up to anybody who has questions for Jodie. Just raise your hand and we'll get you a mic.
Oh, Beth Ann, how old are you? What am I, 49, something like that. And this is, I started having babies at 29. I was 29 with Georgia. So 20 years of raising a family.
Now you're at this juncture where you will do other books?
I'm so glad you asked that. Is my publisher still here? Yeah, I want to write a book about women being unattached. This whole book was about proximity to power. This was about me next to my family, next to my children, next to my men, and really needing those places to anchor. You know, as a kid, I felt small. As a woman, I felt small, and I needed anchors that were bigger than me. And so the book ends, there's some loss in this process. And at the end of this book, it is the right now for me. And the right now is a lot of detachment. So my children go to their dad's house every other week. I've never had that. Like, I can get up or not. They're 5 days out of the week, or 7 days I can not get up. I can drink a bottle of wine. I can run for 2 hours. I can travel. And that is this next thing I'm learning. This was about learning identity and learning that maybe gender is rigged. It's not how we thought it was. This next book that I want, and this place that my mind is now, is about detachment for women, because I think that's radical. I think for women, we are taught to be attached. We are taught to stay close to business, stay close to morals, stay close to a company, a man, a child, good things. But we're always taught to stay close. And the idea of going far on your own, you travel all the time by yourself, but that is radical for women. And I want to experience that. I also want to talk about that. Yeah. Which part, the detachment or the attach? Yeah.
That's one reason why I asked the age and the things that you were, as you say, women are taught to be, not in my generation.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I guess,
So
and also maybe
wonderful
family to family in many instances. generational and family to family, depending on the culture of your family. Like I said, every mama has a way. And my mama, our family was extremely traditional.
Yes.
So my father went out and made the money. My mom also went out, but she was responsible for the house. And so I had a very traditional upbringing.
Exactly.
Mhm. Hi, Joe.
Hey, Jodie, how you doing?
Not my ex-husband, Joe. Just for clarity.
So, but that's what I want to talk about. I actually want to talk about Joe. You know,
Do it,
I
yeah.
got here a little late, so I'm not sure if you covered that. But obviously, Joe comes from a cultural background where sexuality is extremely perceived as a binary thing. Can you talk a little bit about how he coped in the beginning of this process, and did he struggle with identity? How did it affect your relationship? Because obviously what I've experienced with Joe personally is that he's been amazing throughout this process, and you wouldn't see an individual who had any kind of issue at all. So I wonder if you can expound upon that.
There's a lot in the book around the back and forth that Joe and I do, this dance that we do. And a lot of it is the husband-wife dance, where the wife doesn't think the husband is doing it the right way, and the husband thinks the wife is doing it the wrong way. And so we do a lot of that. We did a lot of that. I found, and oftentimes the mom is the person to hear this first from the child. It's just the way that a lot of homes are set up. So I heard it first from Pinnell, I am a boy. I held that secret for a long time, kind of downplayed it. When I shared it, there wasn't any negative reaction ever. There was a reaction to terminology. Why do we need to label? Do we even need to use, his question was, do we need to use the word transgender? So he was very accepting, has always been accepting. He's never sidestepped or lost a moment with his children. In fact, he went deeper. He became a more hands-on father. But we differed. He did not want language around it, and I wanted language around it. His father's from Ghana, his mom is from Canada, so he's African and white. When he would go to Africa, they call him white boy. When he would come to America, they call him the N-word. So he thought, why do we need another label? So if we are inundated with labels, why do we place another one that's just going to be more confusing and cause pain? And I thought, I get that, but until we have gender equality, until Black trans women are not being murdered, until we don't have transphobia, then we have to say the word, and we have to put it to a face, and we have to put it to a heart and a feeling, so that you don't have people throwing lie and noosing folks on the street for being gay and being trans. So we never really argued on love at all. We never said no. We both said yes, but there was a way, and he told me this. He goes, sometimes dads do it the dad way, and just let that be. And so I had to let him do it his way, and he had to let me do it my way. A lot of the fallout was, when you are trying to go against the grain, when the family is a non-conforming family, you get a lot of weight. So you have your relatives looking at you, and his relatives looking at him funny, because not only was his wife out of line, out of pocket, mouthy, not making the dinner, having the glass of wine while he was cooking. And then also you have this kid who is not putting on a dress and not being like a pretty little girl. So a lot of the family was looking at us, and that is a weight. So we were fighting all the time, but it wasn't really about, it wasn't over the yes or the no. We were saying yes, but the pressure was on. He's a stand-up dad. He's a supporter of LGBT. I don't think it is a male-female thing. I don't think acceptance is more seen by women than men. I don't think acceptance is seen more by white or Black. I just feel like there are different entry points for people. That's what I've learned. There are different entry points. So he didn't have to say the word trans. He just had to ride every day and hang out every day and love every day and do the homework every day and take to school every day to show acceptance. And I think that's what's really valid. We have to kind of see each person's way of acceptance as strong and we have to welcome them in wherever they're ready to come in. So his father, who's African, quick story, but grandfather is African and very traditional, and we were nervous that he wouldn't support Penelope being transgender. So we decided never to say the word trans. We would just ask him really politely if he would change the pronouns. So instead of saying she, could you just say he? And his response was so fantastic. He said, absolutely, not a big deal, because in my language of Twi, we don't even use gender pronouns. So he had this great relationship with Penelope before he died that didn't really center around the concept of trans. It just centered around communicating. And so wherever we are, that is the point of entry. And so, you know, to clarify, Joe is a fantastic supporter and LGBT advocate and trans ally. And I don't know if that was something that you picked up. Were you thinking that it was maybe different from that, or you just wanted me to clarify?
Him and I went to college around the same time, and we always knew Joe in college as being the very macho guy. You know, he was so no, it was interesting given his cultural background and how binary sometimes African culture could be around sexuality. What was his response to it initially? And maybe a follow-up on your answer, did his struggles with identity based on being from a mixed, a biracial background, you think help him through this process and become more empathetic in the process?
For sure. And I think a lot of the struggle at first was he couldn't take it all the way there. He could say, well, she's a tomboy, right? Tough girl. And he took a very, a direct approach. He said, well, if Penel is a boy, he's gonna have to tell me himself. Penel was like 3. He was like, and Joe's like 6, right? He's a big dude, 6'6". And so he was like, Penel, if you're a boy, you gotta tell me face to face, eye to eye. But once Penelope said, Papa, I'm a boy, it was easy. The difficult part was that when you accept diversity, you have to accept it everywhere. You can't be hypocritical in the family. So we're saying our children are all equal. We will no longer raise them with bias, and boys and girls and trans and cis will be treated the same. Well, then that also applied to me, right? So then we had to shift the way husband and wife were relating, because you can't say there's equality for the kids, but not for the adults. And so the difficulty was never in supporting his kid. It was in translating that non-bias approach and that non-binary approach to an adult relationship. It's much harder. It's much harder when we start to try to be open-minded with adults, because there's so much more that comes with it. So I don't know if I'm answering it correctly, but there was a lot to easy with your child, much harder with your adult spouse. One of the reasons why I say it's really important to accept your kids early, because you have less of the years of holding on to false identity. Basically, when I showed up to Joe like, oh wait, I'm gonna tell you something, I'm a new person, there was a lot of false identity that he was still holding on to. I presented in one way for many years, and then I'm now presenting differently. So it's difficult to make that switch, and so that obviously didn't last as a marriage.
Hi.
Hey, Ash.
I feel I am a teacher. I teach young kids, and I feel like I try to have a lot of conversations with them that are centered in people. And for them, it's very simple, really, when they're young. But at the same time, they're at this developmental stage where you naturally want to categorize people to help make sense of all the information you're taking in as a young person. So, for them, the need to like call girl, boy, black, white, it's a very natural, sociological thing. So when I try to disrupt that and introduce, recently I was talking to my students about gender expression and how that's different than, your sex or the anatomy that you were born with. And it just seems to all really fall apart because for kids, they're like, well, gender expression, if I what does that mean? So that means like the way that you dress, or the things that you play with, or the things that you do, because they're like, but I'm a boy and I can play whatever I want. I can dress however I want and still be a boy, which is all very true. And I just find it's really working with kids that, you know, anytime you're trying to talk about a social construct, that's when it really becomes slippery and you realize it's really made of nothing. So my question is really about when it was coming up with Penelope, was there ever that moment, and I'm also thinking about parents, because I think parents have a lot of concern, like, well, you know, Johnny wants to wear dresses. What does this mean? You know, and most of the time it just means that it's fun and it feels good. But if there was ever that moment in your family where you wanted Penel to be able to identify however he wanted, but maybe thought, can I still help him feel like a girl who wants to do these
Yes.
I'm saying that
Before it fully sank in, I still thought I was defending feminism. I still thought girls can be any which way they choose. They can be tough, they can be prissy, they can be. So I was allowing to Penelope to be any type of girl, right? But you know, there was the moment when Penelope really laid it out for me. Was so clear, and I walked out of that moment, that room, only thinking he. And so I think that the construct exists until it no longer serves you. And that's a big thing. Like, it will serve you if your world is small and if your world remains the same. And that's why I keep saying, go outside of, you know, your group. Because as soon as you go outside your group, that construct actually doesn't work. So when I was in that room with Penelope, and Penelope's telling me about how his life is, I love you, Mama. I don't want to be you. I want to be Papa. You know, and he, in detailed language, described what was going on with him in his world. I left the room, and I no longer thought she. I thought he. So I think we need to use some of these diagrams, like the gingerbread diagram. Has anyone seen that? Where it's the shape of a gingerbread cookie, and it talks about how we identify in the brain and how we love in the heart, and then our anatomy, and it shows the different elements. And that's really good to help kids kind of see the differences, and it's good to help for adults to see the differences between identity and how you present or your sexuality. But again, I cannot say over and over again, just stop and listen. You have to let kids play the whole story out. You have to sit with them and talk things through. You have to sit with your trans friends and let them describe to you. And all those constructs just go away. They don't make sense. They don't make sense at all. Is that?
I agree.
Yeah.
So what I found really interesting was the way in which you just sort of flowed in terms of
In the
your
book
in your
or-
career, in
Oh,
your career. Yeah, you just really flowed. And I was just really struck by that. And I think a lot of people, I read the book. And so I was just really
Thank you.
struck by that you just were like, nope, this is not working for me. I'm going to try something else.
Yeah.
How conscious were you in
Super
that?
conscious.
Like
Yeah.
talk to us a little bit about that, because I think women in particular are also career driven. New Yorker is always that next thing. Got to make more money. I just found that very interesting, and I know you're a free spirit and all that, but still, there's still. I know that you're also
Loosey-goosey.
conflicted about things. So just talk a little bit about how your process in your career.
I think 17 careers in 25 years, 17 different jobs. Really moved a lot, intentionally moved a lot, found things that were interesting to me and did them because they were interesting. And again, when they no longer served me, and it sounds selfish, I just left, right? I didn't, and people would say, but you have to stay at a company for, what is it, like some rule about whatever the years are before you maintain, before you get the status. And I didn't. Stephanie, I was at Zach Posen for what, 30 seconds? Yeah. Maybe 6 months, and then I got pregnant. And I was like, I gotta go. And so the idea was that I like there are things out there that are interesting, and I don't have an opinion about the world yet. And so I want to experience these things and gain some insight and gain an opinion. And I took 47 years to gain an opinion, like a strong opinion. Honestly, all of those, the last 47 years or 45 years feel like experiencing the world, having some perspective. And we have this idea that we want to have instant opinion, instant success. It took me that much time to really feel, I really feel like when I'm talking, I have some substance to what I'm saying because I've had these experiences. So I did do a lot of moving, from music to fashion to beauty, nightlife, publishing. I was in the circus. I was a circus acrobat.
And you also, sometimes you just took these trips.
What kind of trips?
You took a couple of trips, like you were just like, oh, you took some trips.
Are you talking about when I was in the South Bronx?
No.
There's a piece of this.
No, don't say.
I'm not going to spoil it, but if you don't start on page 69 of the book, because that is the most.
No. It's a couple of times where you were like, I just think I need to figure things out. I'm going to go on a road trip.
It is the way I am. I still feel like you follow your impulses, and I don't know. There wasn't a strategy behind it, but it was definitely conscious when I was doing it, and I was very aware that all my friends were 10, 5, 7 years at companies, and I was 6 months, 8 months, a year sometimes.
I had a quick question, but
Hi, Beth Ann. I love you. Good night, Beth Ann.
but maybe you answered it actually to the last point. My question was about, you feel this like new freedom at 49, and a lot of it has to do with detaching yourself from family, and being a wife, and being a mother. And I guess I kind of want to know, like at 29 or at 25, right, 24, if you had felt that freedom, what do you think would have happened? And did you feel that freedom? And did you, I feel like I
did. I detached a lot. Is that what you're saying? Like when I was young, was I detaching as well?
Yeah.
I
Did
did.
you kind of feel free?
I was more so roaming and seeking and finding, but every time I would move, I would then anchor, and I'd move and then I'd anchor and attach to things. You're asking if I suggest you do something now? I do think that, I'll say it again, I think it's radical for women to go, or to say no, or to leave, to not stay. And I don't mean that in a flighty way. I don't mean that to like walk away and never return. But I do think that it is an exercise that we need to master. So if we are young and have all of these, Spelman and working at Mount Sinai, and you've got attachments to things, in some way in your life, some place in your life, detach and find out what happens. Because in those moments when you're detached, whether it's for 5 days or a day or a month, all kinds of great things will happen. Either you will become more free or more creative or more daring or quieter. You might find that you're a still person, So I just think you should try it. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but find places where you can detach from the things that you think you need. People in particular, and companies, and even morals. I think it's really, page 69. Once again, it is important to not do what the good, fill in the blank does. Good student, good girl, good wife, good mother, and do something that's totally off grid and totally off mark. Thank you. Yeah, we got it.
You spoke in the book about your sister, your grandmother, Gloria, your father, all these different personalities. Do you relate any of those personalities to the kids specifically? Like, okay, Penelope is definitely, grandma. Georgia is definitely X, or Lerma, or do you think that happens? Or
I spend most of my time actually thinking about the women and how they relate to me. So, yeah, sometimes I do. I see a lot of the determination from my dad in Cassius. He was the dad who was like, go as far as you want in this world, but don't pass me. I'm the one. I am the top dog. And so I see a lot of determination, a lot of focus in Cassius and my dad, similarities. But really, most of the time, I'm thinking about the folks that came before and me. The folks that came before, and can I have some of what they have inside of me? And I'm hoping that I'm passing that on to my kids, and I'm sure that my kids have some of it too. But honestly, this whole process and this whole path was like me. It became much more about me than about my kids. And so, yes, I do see the family in all of us. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, Jodie.
Oh, you came from out of town.
I did. Okay, so my question is, this is a personal question. For the parents of the friends of your children, of any children who are transgender, how can those parents become better allies, better friends to the parents who are just also learning about their own children?
So how could you be better?
How could we have been? How could I have been?
Oh,
How
in the
could we
past?
have been a better ally, a better friend
You guys were
throughout
great.
that process?
So she's a
Other
mom.
than just sharing like Facebook posts
Yeah, right.
or whatever.
Janelle's a mom at the school, used to be a mom at the school that my kids go to. Ashley, who spoke as well, was a parent at the school. I think the best thing was that you let us unfold as we unfolded. So Penelope always wore pants to school, and they'd be like, "Ooh, go girl," you know, and they'd give high fives, and the kids would laugh and sort of, you know, approve of Penelope's funky style. And then Penelope started wearing boy ties to school, and the kids noticed it and rolled with it. Parents asked questions, and that was fine. Some of the parents at the school, you know, I think as parents, I appreciated some of the questions because they were not rude and they were not mean. They were like, so my son is insisting that Penelope is a boy. What's that about? And we would have baby step conversations. So I think as parents, you can let us go through it with some grace, because we're just trying to figure it out. Sometimes we're quite uncomfortable. Sometimes we're feeling a little weird, to use a very unsophisticated word. And so I don't know if there was better. I think reading up is really good, so that you come to the conversation with a little bit of information. Just Google some stuff. Know that when we're at home, we're usually, like when you see us in the mornings, give us a little bit of decency, because the night before we were probably crying or beating ourselves up. So there's a lot of compassion that I think parents can have to other parents. And then there's a lot of, some of you were bringing me information, and that felt really good. You were clipping articles and sending it to me, and that felt great, because it felt like, okay, I don't have to, sometimes I was feeling like I needed to kind of lay low. One of my friends said, look, Jodie, you're doing all this public stuff, but your family isn't 100% perfect. You and your husband are going through some stuff. You might not even make it. Do you want to just kind of pull back a little bit and not be so visible and not be so pro-LGBT? Because you're looking fragile. And then some of my other friends would say, I think this is really great. I think what you're doing is fantastic, and I'm with you. So I think, showing the solidarity, giving us a pat on the back, basic things like that. Thank you so much. This
Everyone
was
for coming.
my
Give Jodie
first.
a round of
Thank
applause.
you. Hi, Dara.